This program is made possible by 46% of non-retirees believe they can't afford to retire. American Senior Benefits agents help retirees find solutions aiding your journey to retirement and financial security. More at wichita.americanseniorbenefits.com. Moving can be stressful. Whether your move is local or long distance, Two Men in a Truck can help. More at twomen.com.
Are you a wartime veteran ages 73 to 85? Did you know there are new rules that may affect your pension? Don't lose out on benefits you deserve. Our team serves you because you served us. Contact Long-Term Care for Veterans today.
Welcome to Empowering Seniors. I'm your host, Catherine Ambrose, and today I'm with Dr. Charles Kissling. Chuck, thank you so much for agreeing to be on the show. Very happy to have you.
It's my pleasure.
So, retired optometrist.
Yes.
And a new author. So,
Yes.
Your book came out in March, and the name of your book is?
Lessons from a Life Lived.
Very good. Today we're talking about legacy. This is really incredible to write a book to reflect on your life, things that you remember from your family. So let's talk a little bit about your family history and some of the things that have inspired you in your life.
When I was 4 years old, we were visiting my grandfather on his farm, and a tragic accident occurred that affected me the rest of my life. And so what I have done in my memories was collect the memories of that accident and the few memories I have of my grandfather, because he died shortly after this accident. He spent his whole life living on a farm, and not having running water, except the time period when he was in World War I, and he was in France fighting, and I have a whole collection of letters that he wrote home from that. So between those letters and my few memories of him, that's all I have. I never spent time with my dad asking him to tell me about his dad. My dad was an only child. His mom had 4 sons, but my dad was the only one who survived birth. And so my grandfather, I have so little of my memories of him. And as I was reliving these memories in my mind, I found myself saying, I hope that my grandchildren remember more of me than I remember of my grandfather. Mm-hmm. And that came to be a big push for me in writing my book and trying to tell my stories. While I wanted to tell stories about the lessons that I lived and I wanted the lessons to be the important part of the book. By necessity, part of it is about me, and it's about the legacy that I have left for my grandchildren and for all who come after them, I think, so that they perhaps will know more about me than I know about my grandfather. I remember visiting my grandfather in the summer of 1957. When we arrived, the first thing he wanted to do was show us what he had done new on the farm. He had gotten to the point where he was tired of pumping water. Every time they needed water, he would have to carry a bucket out and hang it on the spigot of the hand pump, and then he would pump until the water was full, the bucket was full, and they would carry it inside and dump it in the sink or dump it in their wash basin, wherever they needed it. He had gotten to the point where he thought there ought to be something better. We arrived, and he took my dad and I to show us that he had put a motor on the pump so that he did not have to pump anymore. And he hung a bucket on the spigot of the pump, And then I can remember him. This is one of the few real memories that I know I have of my grandfather. I remember him reaching overhead and plugging two wires together. From that point, I don't remember what happened. I'm just told. Grandpa and my dad watched the water come out of the pump without my grandpa pumping. The water was coming out of the pump. I, however, reached out and I grabbed the belt that was running between two pulleys between the motor and the pump. And it pulled my hand through the pulley, knocked me on the ground, made my hand a bloody mess. It was mangled, cut off the tip of one of my fingers. Mom and Dad wrapped my hand up with the cloth, took me into the little town to see the doctor, and the doctor initially thought he was going to have to cut my hand off. And Mom and Dad said, no, we don't want that. Stitch it up as best you can. And that's what he did. He stitched my hand up as best he can. I've got little scars all over my hand from it, wrapped up the end of my finger. And Mom and Dad then drove back towards the farm. Meanwhile, my grandfather had left the farm and was driving into town to see how I was doing. And our cars met on the road and stopped. And I can remember my grandfather standing outside the car, looking at me inside through the window, and he had such a sad look on his face because what he had been so proud of and so happy about had been the source of a terrible accident to his grandson. He died a few months after that, not knowing that it didn't affect me terribly. It affected me for the rest of my life because I had to learn to be right-handed instead of left-handed. I was left-handed until that accident. I had to learn to be right-handed, but that was the worst effect it had on me, other than an uncoordinated hand. And he never knew that. I wish he had known that. I wish that my last memory of him was not such a sad memory. But that led me then to start thinking about my own grandkids and about how they will remember me. And hence the book and the stories that I've tried to tell there.
That's a very powerful story. It really is something how grandparents can impact us so, and how connected we can feel to grandparents. So tell us about when you were older and you started wishing that you knew more about your family.
I suppose we all reach a point where we start to ask questions. And I began to ask questions about my grandfather, but there was no one to answer them for me. My dad was gone, my mom was gone. No one to tell me any more about my grandfather. What I did have to help me were letters that he had written home from World War I. I could read those letters in his handwriting on paper that he held and touched. What was interesting about these letters, they're all addressed to his dad, John Kissling, Longford, Kansas, USA. That was it. All of the letters had been censored and were stamped with a censor signature on there, saying that they didn't have any sensitive information in them. And my grandfather, I learned, had a little bit of a sense of humor. He started almost every letter with, "I am fine and dandy, hope you are same." While he was in basic training, he invited his parents to come visit him for the graduation, which was at Camp Funston, which is now Fort Riley. And they lived in Longford, which was 30, 40 miles or so from Camp Funston. And he said to them in this letter, inviting them to come, he said, "You may not recognize me when you get here. I've gained a little bit of weight." Now today, most people going through basic training lose weight. He gained weight. And that was not uncommon for World War I men and soldiers in basic training, because for many it was the first time they'd had 3 meals a day in their whole life. My grandfather said, "You may not recognize me because I've gained weight. Now they call me Big Boy." And he was not a big man. He was about 6 foot tall, 200 pounds of pure muscle. He wrote also about being on the ship going from New York to France. And near the end of that, he wrote, "I have seen a lot of water. I don't care to see any more." Mm-hmm. I think that was his way of telling us that he had been seasick. But he never said, "I've been seasick." He never complained. And that was something else I learned about my grandfather. He never complained in all of his letters and all that he went through. Once arriving in France, his unit walked all the way to the east, to the German border. And at one point, he says in his letter, "I am a half day away from where you came from," to his dad. His dad had immigrated to the United States from Basel, Switzerland. Mm-hmm. And so when my grandfather wrote, "I am a half day away from where you came from," he was telling him, "I'm 10 miles out of Basel." And the censor let that go because, of course, no one except for my great-grandfather would recognize where that meant that he was. And then he said, "I have seen a lot of France. I don't care to see any more." One of the things I've learned through this process, and I think what's important about me putting my words on paper and in a book, there's a Latin saying that says, "Vox audita perit, litera scripta manet." And that means the heard voice perishes, the written letter remains.
Perfect place to end that, because we're going to go to Debbie Trivette. She and I are going to talk about some of the other ways, other than writing a full book, other ways that you can write down some of your memories for yourself and also for your family, for your loved ones, and just keep those memories so people have those stories. So we'll go to Debbie. And we're here with Debbie Trivette, my friend who was on the Empowered Senior Series seminar panel a couple times last year. Mm-hmm. And I brought you on today because our very first seminar in January, you mentioned a memory jar, and that ended up being the most talked about tip from January. And then we brought you in December to visit about that again. But that's not really your expertise. That's just something you threw in and has become a fun thing to talk about. So tell us what you do in real life.
Okay. In real life, I'm a nurse. I've been a nurse for nearly 35 years in the Wichita community. The last 10 years has been focused a lot around, and I don't use the word seniors a lot or geriatrics or elderly. I use the seasoned, mature, experienced population.
Okay.
So, I've worked with watching the transition from in-home to independent living, from in-home as a director of nursing and assisted living. Mm-hmm. And also one of my current roles with my company, I do in-home services where I spend a good hour of time with people. And during this time, what I've come to realize is just the loss of memories. There is a loss of wisdom transition, there's a loss of memories, and the word that we refer to as legacy. So often when I sit and I talk with individuals, when I do foot care, when I'm doing foot care in the home, the greatest gift I give them is just to listen. And the stories are phenomenal. Mm-hmm. But what I find out often, I'll say, is that written somewhere? Not too long ago, I was with a gentleman, and it was close to end of life, and I had revisited a story we talked about, a few visits ago, and I said, I still remember when you told me this story, and his daughter was there, and she said, I've never heard that story, Dad. Mm-hmm. And it just makes you realize how much that we lose if we don't write things down. On a personal note with that, my father died when I was fairly young. I was 28 and he was 47 and an only child. So I don't have a lot of answers. I don't know how my grandparents met. I don't know really much about him growing up. I have a son that never knew his grandfather. Mm-hmm. And it's like, how can we help with that? And sometimes it's overwhelming to think about, writing a whole journal and doing all that. And so you can keep things simple. One of the things that I've come upon is a memory jar, and I love memory jars. You don't have to think about doing memory jars because your end of life is coming. We're making memories today. And a memory jar is simple. For example, with a child or a grandchild, simply keep some notebooks or note cards right alongside a jar, any kind of jar, or a box, anything you want. Something happened today. I was at your basketball game. You shot this 3-pointer. I was so proud of you. Sign it, date it, love Grandpa. Throw it in the jar. Things like that, words of wisdom. When I was younger, I was confronted with this. This is how I dealt with it. Give them words of encouragement. We all want to feel that we were worthy, is to tell the grandkid or the grandchild, I watched you today. You fought through this battle. You taught me. That you actually, no matter how young you were, that you had an impact on their life also. But also the memory jars aren't, as I mentioned, just because you're going closer to the end of life, family memory jars. Do a memory jar every year. Throw in your favorite memories throughout the year, or simply, Mom, thank you for doing this. Date it. At the end of the year, you can sit down and read them. Memory jars they're precious. And like I said, and they're easy.
Very easy.
Yeah.
And so many ways they can be used. And just a way to really touch somebody's heart. So we talk a lot about a legacy isn't just what we leave people in terms of material items or money, but how we're impacting people's hearts, and not just when we pass, but on a daily basis, and helping fuel people's lives.
One of my favorite things is they have books now. This is a storybook. And the storybook can be recorded by grandma, grandpa, anybody. And you read the story. And so then you can send the book off to your grandchild. And when they read it at night, they can open up the book, push the button, and grandma and grandpa are right there reading their book. The other thing I've thought about with this, and as a mom, is I wish that I'd have thought about when my son was first reading, how fun that would have been to record a book together, when the words weren't quite there. What a memory to have that, and to give and for him to pass on to his kids and perhaps grandkids. This is something I hadn't seen a lot of, and it's a talking photo album. And basically, it's just a photo album with, just blank photo pages. And then each page has a recordable segment. So you can put a photo in there or multiple photos, say a birthday party or something, and talk about your experience. And then lastly, we do live in the digital age and everything is online. We've got all the digital photos, but sometimes still sitting down with the good old-fashioned photo album is just priceless. And, you can see by the color of this, the black and white pictures, and the color of the color, that it's a very old album, but it's very priceless. Again, just some ideas to help you create your memories and to share them and pass them on.
And I brought something today for our conversation. This is something I bought years ago for my grandmother, and she filled it out. It has different questions that she answered. It's in her handwriting, which is so fun. And she really worked at this. She really filled out a lot of information. And I was just telling my aunt this morning about it, and she didn't remember I had one of these. So it's kind of fun for the whole family to compare notes, who has what. And just something as simple as this. We're talking to Dr. Kissling about, he wrote a full book. And even something as simple as this, it can just be a fun little activity to do, or do a memory jar.
I love the idea that you were talking about in that book. In fact, you made me think about so often as we age, it's like, well, what does Grandpa want for Father's Day? Or what does he want for his birthday? Ask the grandkids or even your own kids, give me 5 things that you want to know about my life. Mm-hmm. And give me those 5 questions. And you know what? Then I can write those answers down. And one day when you're ready and you want the answers, they'll be in a book or they'll be in a jar. Mm-hmm. I have, as I mentioned, like from my dad, I have one birthday card that says, love, Dad. And it's like just to have one thing that would have said, I was proud of you or anything, or, life will be this or life will be that. It just means so much. As a nurse and the years that I've spent with end of life, you do realize, like you were talking about, that it's all about relationships. That's what it's all about, relationships and what you experience. To give that part of you as you go on is not about you. But like when we talk about legacy, sometimes I look at legacy a little bit differently. Legacy not as in death, but as in life and living. But also my legacy is how I presented myself, how I was a role model for getting through life. When people say you have joy or you have this, but what was the secret behind there? It had nothing to do with what I did or I accomplished, like for me, it has to do with my faith. And, that's the greatest gift, I would want to pass on to my children, my grandchildren, because that's that's to me the key.
And technology today is such a gift because we can do more together at a distance. So my grandchildren live in Chicago, very far away, but my son and daughter-in-law are so great to keep us so connected through video and constant messages and FaceTime. And so certainly if you're watching television, you can learn how to do some of these things and be a little more connected. So, well, some great ideas. So thank you for the show and tell items that you brought today. And we appreciate you being part of this conversation.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you for having me.
And now we'll get back to Dr. Kissling. And we're back with Chuck. So Dr. Kissling, so let's continue our conversation. So you wrote a memoir after you retired from optometry.
Somewhere about 5 years ago, I realized that in the course of visiting with patients, they would share stories of their life with me, and sometimes I would share stories of my life with them. And oftentimes, especially with some of the younger patients, young parents, young kids, I would share a lesson with them. And I decided that some of my lessons that I had learned in life were entertaining enough that perhaps other people would enjoy reading them. And so I began to think about the possibility of putting them on paper. And at some point I said, I should write a book. And a lot of trial and error. And that's basically how I proceeded, was just trial and error until I got it right. And I think it's something anybody can do. There's enough information on the web, if you look for it, enough information to kind of guide you as to how to do this. There are several self-publishing sites, and that's what I did. I self-published it. There are places where you can pay somebody to do it for you. If you just write it out, they'll put it together. But I just went through the process and self-published it myself. And it was a good learning experience. And it was good for me to go through the memories myself. And I think it put me a little bit more in touch with my grandchildren, how they may view me and how they view themselves, and help me to understand a little bit how sometimes they don't seem to be very interested in what's around them. Just like I'm sure I wasn't interested in what was around me, because it was not until later in life when I became interested really in asking some of the questions that I needed to ask about my family who had come before me, about my grandparents. Where did they come from? And once I did get to the point where I had the interest, there was no one there to answer them anymore.
And I hear that all the time, that people say that they wish they would have paid more attention when they were younger, or they didn't want anything from their grandparents' estate sale, and then they wish they would have taken this or that. And I think that adult kids and grandkids are just in a different phase of life, and they aren't thinking of those things. And so by kind of doing their future self a favor by pre-collecting some of the stuff and putting it together, it's a gift for their future. They say that we all have a book inside of us, and don't die with your book inside of you. And so congratulations on getting your book written. So what do you think it would have meant for you if you would have had a book that your father had written or your grandfather had written?
Oh, it would have meant a ton, you know, especially my dad, because he growing up as an only child and going off to World War II, it would have meant a lot to me, and I wish in some respects that he had, because then I would have some of the answers that I don't have now and that I never will have. Yeah.
Well, again, congratulations. And Chuck, if someone wanted to know more about your book and wanted more information on your book, where would they go to find it?
It's available at Amazon, so Amazon.com, and you can search for the title of the book, Lessons from a Life Lived, or you could search for my name, Charles Kissling, and it will show up either way.
Well, thank you so much for being on Empowering Seniors. It was great to have you on the show.
It was my pleasure.
And thank you for tuning in. I'm Catherine Ambrose, and this is Empowering Seniors. If you have any questions or comments for us, you can send them to empoweringseniors@kpts.org, and we'll see you next time.
This program is made possible by 46% of non-retirees believe they can't afford to retire. American Senior Benefits agents help retirees find solutions aiding your journey to retirement and financial security. More at wichita.americanseniorbenefits.com. Moving can be stressful. Whether your move is local or long distance, 2 men in a truck can help. More at 2men.com.
Are you a wartime veteran ages 73 to 85? Did you know there are new rules that may affect your pension? Don't lose out on benefits you deserve. Our team serves you because you served us. Contact Long-Term Care for Veterans today.